Alright. So, I'm going to be talking about procedural graphic generation, which I'm pleased to say will have no numbers in whatsoever, based on the previous talk. And what do I mean by this? This is the idea that in my roguelike Ultima Regum, all items have unique visual representations, which is to say every sword has a different blade, a different pommel, a different grip, and so on. Every piece of armor might have a different design, different colors, different shoulder pads, that's not the phrase, and so on. And also that what items look like are tied to the civ to which they belong. Which is the idea that if you discover an item which you've not seen prior, you can still perhaps try and judge where that item came from based purely on how it looks. So if you find it won't say this is a piece of armor from the nation of blah blah blah. You can kind of try and judge from purely how it looks, maybe who it belonged to. As for why I'm doing this, there's kind of four core reasons. Firstly, because it's new and sort of fairly unique-ish. Secondly, because it's just quite fun to make this work. Thirdly, because I think it looks pretty good. And fourthly, because I found that I can do a kind of visual storytelling thing with this, which we'll have to talk about later. And that my roguelike is quite story-driven, and that I found that rather than having reams and reams of exposition or doing the kind of Bioshock trick of you have sort of logbooks elsewhere and that kind of thing, I can tell a lot of the story I want to tell through the graphics and through having the player kind of piece together clues through different items and through different logos and symbols and so on. So this talk is going to be about, firstly, how did this madness begin, and why I started doing this kind of procedural graphic idea. Secondly, how will this madness end, and where I intend to kind of take this concept and what I hope to do with it. And thirdly, how can I use it to tell stories? So where it began was a few versions ago I started to create some kind of very simple early game puzzles in the game. And these involved, in kind of ancient temples, these stone blocks, which have different kind of shapes on them. So a sun, an octopus, a skull, and a boar. And one thing I found quite quickly was that I could very simply vary these a lot. So the tentacles and that could be in different places, or the skull could be open or shut and so on, or the boar could have different patterns. And this was a pretty trivial thing to do, but it seemed to add a lot of kind of variety to the graphics, and that every single stone block would have some different kind of pattern etched into it. And this is all ASCII and ANSI graphics, by the way. And I found that this was a pretty simple thing to do, but that it contributed quite a lot to the kind of feel of the game, and to that no item or nothing that you found would ever be the same next time. And this got a lot of good feedback, and so I then figured, well, maybe I could try this with some other items. And so I thought about common items in roguelikes, and then you get potions. And whilst my game is pretty fantasy-free, there would be use for you to have, say, potions of water or oil or poison or that kind of thing. And so I thought, well, okay, maybe I could have it vary how bottles look. And those all have the exact same gameplay thing of they are just a bottle that you can put a thing in. But that you can vary their shape and their pattern, and that's just a lot more intriguing than just having a sort of little lowercase o on the map which you pick up and then that's a bottle added to your inventory. And likewise, if you can drink certain aspects of it, then you can have like that one's 3/4 full, that's half full, that's a quarter full, and so on. So you can have it kind of show how much there's in the bottle. And how these graphics are kind of built up is that there's sort of 3 layers in each, and that there's a kind of back layer of just the pattern of the poison pattern. Then there's a kind of layer of where it draws a shape based on the upper layer, so like a circle or a square and so on. And then it pastes on top of that the shape of the bottle. And then with that you can just vary what the kind of texture of the liquid looks like. So that's water, oil, blood, and poison. And then you can quite quickly have a huge kind of series of different shapes and different sizes and different patterns for the items that you have. And quite quickly this became a core feature of the game, this kind of visual generation of what the game looks like. So these are land textures mostly. So that's snow up top, that's sand, that's stone, that's dried lava. These are all grasses in various different climates. That's wood, that's a bit of a sort of tree with some branches and some leaves. and the branches and leaves are entirely procedural, and they will never come up again, hopefully. And even though it adds very little to and was clearly that adds little to the player's gameplay experience, it adds a lot to the kind of cohesiveness of the world, I found, and the stuff I'll show later also kind of tries to build on this idea. And then that's lava, and then that's water. And then, again, those are some tree branches. And a lot of people said that they found that this was not just something that hadn't really been done before in terms of just creating graphics kind of on the fly like this, but that it felt much more like they were exploring a kind of full 3D world rather than a kind of flat 2D roguelike world, because they knew that every tile had this kind of graphical depth with kind of within that tile to see and to look at, rather than just seeing the top-down map view. And then also I did it with bricks, and that was quite simple. So each civ has a brick type and a brick color that they use. And so if you walk around one city, it'll be in a certain color, a certain brick style. A new city will be a different style, and so on. And if you come to a town and you don't know who owns it, then you can try and judge that from a lot of visual cues, such as what the bricks look like. And then also on the main menu of the game, it has these kind of landscape pictures, which it comes up with fresh each time, which kind of the moon or the sun or clouds and mountains and rivers and so on. And then these are the icons for in-game religions, and you can kind of see how these are built up as there's kind of a lot of component parts. And then for each one, it picks from those parts and tries to put them tries to kind of link them in a hopefully reasonably intelligent way. So while some of them do look a lot better than others, in general, that's kind of how it comes up with these symbols. And again, I found that it was quite easy to create a system where, based on real-world religious icons, where in general they're quite kind of stark, and they try to be very sort of simple to draw and simple to sort of quickly recognize. I tried to copy that and make sure that the symbols were very sort of clear what they were and what the kind of gaps between each one was. And then also I did this with the flags for the various nations in the game. So for feudal nations, they look like the kind of flags that we're used to now. So they might have some bars or columns or chevrons and so on. For nomads, I went for something a lot more kind of symbolic. A lot of those were based on the flags of Eastern European countries and kind of Central Asian countries. And then for hunter-gatherers, I went for a much more kind of animal and building focused pattern. And likewise, each game it'll pick what kind of flags come up and what color schemes those flags have, and so on. And then finally, this is the one I've probably become most well known for. It procedurally generates the coats of arms for the various families in the game. And again, each time it will piece these, link them up in various ways, and some are kind of one large picture like that, or the skull, or the stars. Some are two pictures, either sideways or up and down, like those and those. And then you can have some sigils, which are like 4 sections in a single shield. And also the banners at the base have the kind of mottos on them, which the game comes up with as well. But that's not in this picture. But as this went on, people seemed to think that this was a really intriguing aspect, and so I just felt that it could become a really kind of core identifying feature of the game. And also it was just interesting to see, and once I'd done this aspect in particular, it became clear how I could use this kind of density of data in the world to do some intriguing storytelling things with. So I'm just going to say a bit about this kind of visual storytelling idea with 2 prior game examples and how I intend to use them. So one of my favourite games is Dark Souls. And that does a lot of this, where there's pretty much no explicit story told in the game, but the player can kind of play as a detective almost and seek out all this kind of data to figure out for themselves what the plot is. And one example is that in Dark Souls 1, a core item is that thing that the guy's placing on the left. which is called the Lord Vessel, and in Dark Souls 2, nothing is said of this item at all, but in the basement of one room, there's this kind of ruined thing, which is the exact same texture, and once someone found this on Reddit a few weeks ago, it's now just kind of spiraled into this colossal discussion over what this means, about the fact that there's this kind of little tiny fragment of this crucial item from Dark Souls 1 hidden somewhere in Dark Souls 2. And I think that's really intriguing, both because it gets the player actively seeking out that story, rather than just being told, okay, there's the Dark Lord and he's doing this. And it also acts as a kind of nexus for discussion within people who play that game, because there's now 1,000 theories on why has this crucial item between games been destroyed and why is it found here. And then likewise, when you start this game, you are told there was this kind of order of knights, and that some of these knights were burned in a great fire, while some were not. And when you first play, you encounter a lot of black knights, which are the ones at the top. I don't know how clear that is with the sun. And then later you find the exact same kind of arm pattern, but with silver knights, and you get this kind of clicking moment where you realise that these are the knights that you'd heard about prior, and that the ones that you'd fought at first were the half that got burned, and these half were not. And nowhere in the game does it say these black knights are the ones who got burned, the silver knights didn't, but you can kind of piece this together from what you've been told. And then likewise, in a later city, which used to be kind of co-inhabited by giants and humans, you get this staircase, which has a huge staircase in the centre for the giants, and a small one down inside for humans. Again, nothing else is kind of said about that, but it's just a kind of nice little detail, where if you pick it up, it shows that they kind of thought through what this would mean. And lastly, a shield with a two-headed snake. If you've played Dark Souls, you may recognise the significance of that. If not, I will not spoil it for you. Another example is from a strategy game. It's from the early C&C games. And one example of this kind of visual storytelling are these two buildings for the two sides in the game. The one on the left is an airstrip where planes come in, they land and they drop off a tank or a buggy or a jeep or something, and then they fly off. And the second is a weapons factory where tanks and so on are built on site. And whilst this could just be seen as just kind of general variation between the two sides in this game, it serves a kind of storytelling role as well, as the army on the right is a kind of highly funded Western army, and they can therefore build their stuff on site and so on. Whereas the army on the left is a kind of ambiguous sort of third world militia type of army, and so it makes sense that they may buy their stuff elsewhere, have it flown in, land, and then take off again. And so this kind of reinforces the theme between these two sides. Another example in a later game, these kind of buildings here are the kind of civilian buildings in this game, and they all look like kind of like habitats that you might get if you landed on another world, maybe, and that they all look kind of sealed up, and there's solar panels and they're partly beneath the ground and so on. And the game says nothing to you about why they look like this, but once you read into the game's plot, you can see a clear theme in why these are built like this, as the game is set in this kind of ecological crisis, and so it would make sense to build things which are much more sturdy than what we have now. And then a third example is that a core kind of theme of this game is that the Earth is being terraformed by this kind of alien substance, which is the green stuff. And in the top picture, it's next to a tree, and if you leave that tree with this stuff around it long enough, the tree kind of mutates and turns into this new thing. And whilst that's a core gameplay aspect, it also kind of just hammers home the fact that the Earth's land is being changed. And also C&C did a kind of intriguing thing where they would take real-world photos and then change them to reflect the mutated trees of the game. So I thought, well, how can I do something like this? Because I've always really hated when games just tell you what the entire story is up front. I really like that kind of challenge of trying to work out for yourself what is the plot of this game, what does it all mean, and so on. And since I was doing so much on graphics now, I realised that I could maybe somehow use this to tell the kind of story I wanted to tell. And this first began to play when I began to work on graves and graveyards. And all the graves tied to characters which the game has created in its history. So if you know that there was a war 200 years back, then you can go into the graveyard of a nation that fought in that war and you can see who the people were and they will all be there. Or if there was a plague 1,000 years back, then you can look at those graves and see who died in that plague and so on. And then I realized, well, you can clearly link up those graves to the families and to the people within that civ more explicitly than I had been doing. So if you find graves of noble families, then they will have their icon shown on the grave. And in turn, I realized that you could, that rather than saying in some kind of text log or some sort of fragment of a journal somewhere or that kind of thing, that you could have a kind of procedural kind of detective work almost, that once you see that there's a certain family with a certain icon, and then you can see that there's a grave from that family, then you can link up those two things. And if maybe you know that that person had a particular unique weapon which was buried with them, then once you know what their coat of arms is and where they were buried, then you can maybe hunt that thing down yourself. So rather than having a quest log saying this person died at this time, he was buried with his amazing sword, it just does nothing of that. But once you piece these together, then you might know which grave to dig in to find what you're looking for. And so yes, this is very much the focus of how quests work in the game, in that there's very little told to you, and you have to kind of try and link up different little bits of data to figure out where you might find certain things for certain people. And also it allows you to have these kind of quite complex, in some cases, stories told, but without it just being a big block of text. And I think it's much more satisfying for the player to figure out what this story was than to be told this story, because a lot of stories in Dark Souls, for example, are highly ambiguous and open to interpretation, and that's one of the things I like about it a lot. And in the same way, if you get two nations and they both claim that the other nation started the war, then they might both interpret that war in different ways, and that might affect what you can find in those civs. And also, this was a big aspect, that I didn't want to make a game where it felt too gamey in a way, where it felt like everything had just been placed there when the game came up with it. Because one flaw I felt with Dark Souls 2, for instance, was that it feels like it's just a series of levels placed there for the player, whereas Dark Souls 1 felt like you were exploring a place. And that's the kind of feeling I wanted to get here, that it wasn't that it's just a set of dungeon levels or a set of different castles which are no links and so on, but that everywhere you look there will be links between that world and that world's history. And also, though I won't go into this too much, the core kind of mechanic of the game later on will be around the kind of manipulation of history and the historical record, and what counts as fact and what does not count as fact. And having this kind of long history of the world when you start the game, combined with the fact that a certain piece of history, like this person died here with this weapon, but that's linked to all kinds of other aspects, I thought was very important for this. And then another example is the generation of keys. And I realized when I did this, most games when you pick up a key, you magically know what that key is for. It says you have picked up the mansion key, you have picked up the key for the castle 5th floor or something. And I decided that didn't make any sense whatsoever, and I wondered how I could change that whilst not making it infuriating. Because it would be annoying if you picked up a key and had no idea, well, what it was for, but at the same time, if you pick it up and you somehow psychically know from the key what it's for, that also makes no sense. And so I thought that I could use this kind of visual idea to give you a hint towards what that key is used for, rather than just saying it outright, and also rather than just having it completely unknown. So there's kind of 3 tiers of keys. So the keys at the top are for things like castles and cathedrals and sort of important and wealthy buildings and so on. Middle row are for things like markets and shops and so on, and then the base row are for just kind of normal houses for normal people. And I found that this, again, was a pretty sort of simple thing to add kind of different sets of key heads in different colours, and to have each key that's created by the game just pick one based on what it's used for, but that it served this kind of dual goal of supporting the gameplay, of letting the player work out what this key might be for, and supporting the kind of themes and story. And in terms of gameplay, because once you see a key, you can make a kind of reasonably good guess about where it might be used. So if it's a gold key and you're in a town and there's only 2 really impressive buildings, it must be for one of those 2 buildings. Or if you pick up a low key, then it must be for one of the millions of houses, and therefore you will need to do more research if you care about what that key is going to be used for. And it also gives a kind of thematic info as well, that I wanted to kind of emphasize the wealth difference within these nations, and to stress to the player that different districts and different buildings will yield different things. So whilst it might be harder to use a wealthy key to invade somewhere wealthy, there will be much more from that rather than if you just use a low-down key to just enter someone's random house. So, what now, in summary? The next thing is to further kind of link the story and the graphics. The example I gave of the shield and the graveyard is one example, but I hope once I'm done to have just a lot more things like that, where you can link up different aspects of the world and kind of work out these stories for yourself. Come on. Second aspect is the next kind of big chunk I intend to move on to is to create graphics for weapons and armor, which, as I said at the start, I intend to link to different nations. So if you find a sword, it won't say it's a sword of this nation, but if you look at it, you can try and work out where it's from and therefore maybe whom I want it back. Or if you wield it against a certain nation, then they might assume that you're from the nation who owns that sword, and so on and so forth. More coats of arms, because they look damn cool. And thank you for listening. There we go.
So this is very nice. I especially like the keys. But I noticed that all the 3 tiers of your keys have the same level of complexity of the feather of the key.
Yes. I have noticed that as well. The only answer is I haven't got around to doing that yet.
I see.
But I do intend to have for the sort of top tier keys, it'll be sort of patterned or fancy in some way, and for the kind of middle ones, might have a few sort of small things, and then for the low down ones, it'll just be standard. But yes, definitely.
Another thing, I've actually seen that in some games where you have the head of the key is repeated somewhere on the door or on the lock itself.
Yeah.
So you can tell by,
I might steal that idea actually. I might steal that idea.
That would be pretty lax security on the phone.
Oh yeah, true. True.
It's like having your address on your key.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, but if it's a key for a royal family, it makes sense to have some crest of that family on the key and on the lock too.
It may not say, for this specific work or door, something to do
Yeah.
with the royal.
Or the symbol of the smith who made.
Maybe you can go and break into his house, find out who he works for.
Yeah, and find a chest with spare keys.
Exactly.
Or the he made.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing I want, where you get one kind of small item, and from that you can work out a whole story and a whole kind of sequence of connections between people and between nations and families and so on. Yeah.
And even if it's not realistic, it's interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have screenshots of the game in development?
Yes, I can just load it up quickly.
Because I think the graphics look amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Just separate assets.
Yeah.
So how does it look in context? Just curious.
Hang
It
on,
looks amazing.
Hang on, I'll simulate it all. That's the one.
All the time.
So what's that loading?
It's kind of transparent.
This is a sort of between versions, so this one might take a while to load up. And I'm sort of halfway between 0.5 and 0.6 at the moment, so there's a lot of crap in there right now which needs to be removed. Anyway.
This procedure-generated graphics, especially when it comes to storytelling, sometimes I think, or maybe the risk with this is that feels very random at some point. So you play one game and it's kind of cool, and then you play the next game, and then this family has not a red axe as it has, but blue axe, and has a different name, but it blurs at some point. Or I fear could do this. How do you want to solve this to give this kind of procedural art direction?
I think you're right that that's definitely an issue that across different games it will sort of kind of blur it. And I suppose there's sort of two answers to that. That's what a sort of load your game screen looks like. So it shows you what civs you found, it shows you where you are got on the world map, the flag of your civilization, what religion you follow, lots of other stuff. Anyway, whilst you're looking at that, to answer your question, I think there's two aspects to it. I think one aspect is it's actually a very combat-light game. So even though it is still permadeath, and even though and I do want it to be a very challenging game, a lot of the challenge isn't from combat. So new players particularly won't die rapidly compared to most of the roguelikes. So the player will live for longer with a certain set of world than in other roguelikes. But I think the second aspect is, I guess, I feel the more connections that there are, like the sigil and grave ones I've had, I feel the more connections there are and the denser that the world seems, I feel that will negate a lot of the sort of, oh my god, there's so much, what the hell does it all mean, feeling, because each world will feel much more like it's its own complete thing, because everything will be linked up and matched up and joined up in new ways each time. I hope, anyway. But yeah, I definitely think that's an issue, but I think, particularly with the death is relatively rare thing, I think that won't be a big issue.
I think on that, Dwarf Fortress could be said to have some of the same problem that a lot of this but it doesn't matter so much because you have kind of so much agency and control over it, you end up shaping things.
Yeah.
Will there be much of that in this game?
Over kind of shaping the world, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, but not in the way that Dwarf Fortress does it. In that, so most games where you can change what the world is, you kill a king and a new king rises, and it's all within kind of set quest lines. The core kind of mechanic which I'm doing differently is this idea that it's kind of, and I speak as an academic first and then as a programmer second, the kind of core concept is that history is a sort of more fluid notion than we maybe normally accept, and that history and then what we now call history is the result of thousands of years of both research and data and people interpreting that info, and that what we deem to be history is the kind of consensus of what we all agree history means. And one thing that you can do in the game is that you can change what the agreed history is, and that then has an effect on what the game world is. So if everyone thinks nation A attacked nation B, then that's fact, in air quotes. But if you can persuade people that in fact no, there's all this new data which says in fact no, B attacked A first, then that might have serious impacts. That might change the politics of one nation, or that might cause a second war, or that might cause something else, and so on. And this is just a screen of how cities look when you look at them and when you move through them. It shows what each district is, and so on. Anyway, yes.
I'm just thinking what would be fantastic is if you were able to time travel, and you set up some events in a certain way. You see how that makes a difference in 100 years. Just how different things are.
You can find past events and kind of alter. You can kind of do the reverse of that. Like if you know that there's a particular battlefield somewhere, then you can potentially change what the agreed history around that battlefield is. Or if you know that a particular person was assassinated by some other person, then you can potentially completely erase that from history, and that might have some kind of knock-on effects. So it's kind of a butterfly effect thing, almost, that you make some change to what people think history is, and that has a kind of knock-on effect and changes what the game world looks like. And actually, I'll just go into the coats of arms, because why not? And let's leave it on that one.
About this digging up treasure from the graves, what stops the player from digging up all the graves
Excellent question. I suppose two things. Firstly, I'm sure that there will be some NPCs there who are not particularly fond of you just going from grave to grave, looting them. The second aspect is that, which is a whole different talk, but say briefly, that obviously most roguelikes have a food clock, other roguelikes have some kind of equivalent clock, like the Rebel Fleet in FTL, or that you can't go back a floor in Isaac or Doom and so on. The clock in this game is pretty weird, but there is a kind of overarching clock. It's more like Adom's corruption clock than any other clock, I'd say. It's most like that, in that it's a kind of slightly abstracted out background clock, but that the further you go on in the game, the bigger the effect it becomes. I don't say any more than that because I don't say what the clock is really. But yeah, there is something.
You are limited.
Yeah, and kind of the core gameplay concept is that given the kind of density of the world, but that there's a clock in the background, it's not so much an open world game as a game set in a huge world, but you need to make choices about what to explore and what items to look into and what paths to take, given that you know in, say, 1 month of game time you have to do something, 2 months of game time, and so on.
How do you prevent the same graphic from being generated?
Yes, the same for things like these, for the flags, for religious icons and so on. Like this is made from, I think there's 5 bits of data here. There's the background, which is called the sort of middle bar background. Then it stores that the outside is white, inside is blue. It stores that it's a 2-bar flag, so stuff across the base. It stores what each of those are and then their color, and then it just adds those to a list of things that can never be created again. And most games have about sort of 40 to 50 noble houses, but there's something like 100 different patterns. And so, in that case, it's going to happen. For religions, I found you can generate up to about 1,000 before it just stops and can't make any more new ones, but that's more than the game needs. For flags, for the feudal flags, there's a few thousand of those. For nomadic and hunter-gatherer flags, there's only a few dozen patterns for those, but there's always going to be fewer than that number in the game, so we'll never come up with them again. Yeah.
I see that there's some last names in the family tree that aren't relevant on the houses.
Well, yes.
So are they lost? Or
no,
are they
white means alive, grey means dead, and the dotted line means married into.
Okay. So
And I decided to do a slight change from history here, of rather than names being passed on by the male line, names are passed on based on the more important family. So in this case, the family name people on the left might be male or female, but the people who married in, their surnames are ditched because they're from a less important family.
So you're not doing that, the usual thing with families, because I said the world apart, it's,
What do you mean?
a lot of invented game worlds are sexism.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not. I made a pretty kind of specific choice at the start to not go with the male and lead.
those aren't British values, though.
But no, every NPC is just a flip coin between male and female, and indeed some civilizations vary in terms of how they look upon things like same-sex relationships, or whether they have monogamy or polyamory as their default marriage type and so on. So that's varies slightly as well.
Do you have some kind of ASCII editor or
No, in fact, what I do is I in fact draw it as a list of strings, and the game knows that if there's an A, then it prints a straight line, if there's a B, then it does a slash and so on. The rules, of course, are different for each graphic, because there's a lot of graphics that need different things to be shown, but yes, it's all stored as strings, which means that the size of the code, in air quotes, is about 200,000 lines, but almost the entirety of that is the strings for the graphics, rather than the code itself.
Isn't that a very tedious way of drawing?
No, it was at the start, but I've become pretty good at it now, and I don't think it's any slower than creating an ASCII editor to do this in. It's kind of one of those sunk cost things that I've become so used to doing it like this now, I can do it quickly enough that it's not worth my time to make a special thing to do it.
Can you show an example of those wall patterns that you showed?
Oh, yeah. Hopefully. If it crashes, I take no blame. Yeah, let's go and find a graveyard then.
Offloading.
The walls, the city walls.
Oh, the city walls do not currently. They are one of the things that I'm adding in this release. But if we go and find,
Whoa, those trees are beautiful.
thank you. And of course, again, if you look at each one, it will give you a branch pattern for it.
Amazing.
And anyway, yeah. So we'll climb up a graveyard wall. So again, we can glance at the wall, and all the buildings in this nation will have the same brick color. And if we decide to jump down, then we can have a glance at that grave and see that Mir Ponmuji died in 1116 and was slain serving the Pope. So from that we can deem that this is probably a theocratic nation. So,
Have you thought about, for example, when you have a tree and you look at the branch, to put, I don't know, a bird nest or
there's...
a tree hole
Yeah,
with
well,
some hidden treasure in
weirdly, a few people have asked me about whether there's going to be creatures in the game, because if there's farms, then you should have, cows and horses and so on. Yes, but it's
like
not
fruits,
urgent.
fruits, for example.
Yeah. There are fruit trees, but they are finished. So, but yes, here. So this is a kind of example of these sort of links between things. So this guy, so the leader of this nation is called a pope. So if we look at where we are, we're in this civ. So if we go into the encyclopedia and look through until we find which civilization that was, it should be in here. There we are. Then we can see that they are ruled by a pope, and who is advised by a council called the Sacred Assembly. And so again, if you go into a graveyard and you have no idea who owns it, but you can see a grave and it reads with some data, then you can use that data to feed back and figure out who owns this place and
Decide if you should start digging up or...
yes, exactly. And to choose if you should start digging it up or not. Exactly.
Dig a regret.
Yeah, in this release, yes, but not right now.
And you can also check their policies, so
Yep.
if they totally don't mind grave digging.
Yes, the policies are best compared to the gods in Crawl, for instance, in that they basically give you a series of distinct buffs to various things. Is basically how they function. So you choose a civilization at the start, and that determines what upgrades and downgrades your character has. And if you change civilization, which you will be able to, then you'll gain the upgrades of the new one, but your old civilization might not be particularly happy about the fact that one of their nobles has just abandoned them to the enemy. Yeah.
How do you feel about abstracting away game interaction that isn't going to affect your main goal, which is to create a narrative that you kind of player-found narrative?
Yeah.
For instance, entering towns, are you still going to keep it as a roguelike style, moving individual steps around the shops? Or, when it comes to that, are those interactions important enough not that you couldn't just abstract them away completely?
That differs between small settlements and large ones. So, this is a graveyard, so this takes up a single... Go away. So this takes up a single tile on the world map, so you can just go into and walk around and look at graves, open them up and deface them however you want. And for towns, it'll be the same, so you travel to that town and then walk around and so on. But for cities, when you move around cities, they will look, as they do in the encyclopedia, like this. So you will move from district to district in the abstracted layer and then explore the district like you would a full town or a full whatever. And the reason I did the districts like this was kind of because I wanted to emphasize this idea that in this era, this is kind of set sort of 17th century roughly, that not everyone would be able to go into every district in a city because the normal people couldn't go into the army district maybe, or they couldn't go into the royal district and so on and so on. And the different classes of people and different groups of people would be able to access certain districts or wouldn't. And by this kind of division like this, I think that gets that idea across, and based on your status within the nation whose city you're in, that will determine whether you can explore the entire city or whether you need to sneak in some districts and so on.
So you have racial borders as well then?
Yes.
Yes. Excellent.
Well, there we go.
Very nice.
Thank you.